this computer. Okay. So as I said, November 24th is our AGM, and there will not be a guest speaker. After that, there will be, Susan Holmes has been working on a slate of guest speakers. So the membership meetings will continue. We just have to figure out who's going to do what to make sure that things happen. I'm asking you to mute yourselves. I have tried to mute everybody, but if you put yourself back on mute, I might not notice right away. And it's really important that you put yourself on mute so that when Heather begins to speak, everybody can hear her well. Our guest speaker is Heather Połowyk. Heather is going to talk about the bank swallows and conservation for bank swallows in Nova Scotia and beyond, I believe. Bank swallows are aerial insectivores, which means that they are birds that eat insects while flying. And we've all seen that acrobatic sight of birds catching flies in the air. It's quite a remarkable feat that they do. In fact, this afternoon, when I was watching a Western kingbird, I saw it catch two at one go, and it was pretty impressive. As a group, aerial insectivores are declining at a faster rate than any other bird group in Canada. That is a huge concern for everyone who loves birds, but it's also, concern for the entire ecosystem, because we need all of the organisms to be able to manage this. We don't understand fully, but I imagine Heather will speak to that, but what this decline is about. But certainly there are some contributing factors, such as using insecticides and such. Heather's presentation will look at the life history of bank swallows, including habitat, migration, breeding behavior. We'll examine bank swallows' status in Canada and why they're at risk. And finally, we'll discuss ways Bird Canada and each of us can help with these birds so that they can help recover. And so a little bit about Heather. Heather has studied forest bird species at risk and monitored the foraging behavior of aerial insectivores over wetlands, and has assisted with a captive breeding program for loggerhead shrikes. Heather now coordinates the Atlantic Canada Bank Swallow Working Group, which is a group of stakeholders working together to help conserve bank swallow populations. We asked Heather about her most memorial birding moment, and she said that, oddly enough, she wasn't actually birding. She was studying wetlands in Lake Erie, Ontario, carrying a bunch of equipment through 6 feet tall, unending phragmites, which is an invasive reed. So she was going through these stands. When she got to a clearing, about 100 to 150 tree swallows swooped in and landed right in front of her. It was beautiful, and it motivated her to keep working during a heat wave. She hopes to see red crossbill and white-winged crossbill, which live around her in the winter, but she's never seen them. And maybe this will be your lucky winter. In fact, hopefully it will be. It looks like we're going to have a good finch bird or finch year. And maybe, Heather, you can tell us, where do you live?
I'm in Ontario still, so I'm in Waterloo right now, which is a little bit south of town. I actually don't know. I'm used to saying north because I'm from Newmarket. So, okay. But they're apparently all around. I just never seen them. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I have my fingers crossed for you too. They are amazing birds to see. They're strange looking with those crossbills. Heather will do her presentation, and she'll be pleased to answer your questions at the end. Please type your questions into chat, or at the end you can take yourself off mute and ask your question directly to Heather. So with that, Heather, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Diane. That was awesome. I'm so excited about that finch report too. I've never even heard of that, so I'm excited that it's a good year for them. It's going to be great. Okay, let's share my screen here. Okay, can you see that okay? Can you hear me okay? Hopefully.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Heather Połowyk, as you know, but I'm the bank swallow conservation coordinator for Birds Canada, based in Atlantic Canada. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the bank swallow. So I'm joining you from Waterloo, Ontario, the current and traditional lands of Mississauga. Mississauga is of the Credit First Nation, Neutral People, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe. This territory is covered by the Haldeman Treaty of 1784 and Treaty 3 from 1873. Birds Canada understands that Indigenous voices, knowledge, and ongoing work on the land are critical for wild birds to thrive in sustainable ecosystems, and we gratefully support the needs, aspirations, and rights of Indigenous peoples that care for this land. Today's presentation will cover what Birds Canada does, what aerial insectivores are, their current status. Then I will discuss bank swallow life history and why these birds are at risk. And next, I will cover the conservation initiatives that Birds Canada is working on and ways that everyone can help bank swallows and birds in general. And then finally, there'll be time for questions. So for anyone that's unfamiliar with Birds Canada, we are a not-for-profit organization built on the contributions of thousands of members and volunteer citizen scientists. Our mission at Birds Canada is to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada through scientific research, innovative partnerships, public engagement, science-based advocacy, and on-the-ground action. And together with our supporters, we are Canada's voice for birds. So on to our focus today. What are aerial insectivores? And simply, aerial insectivores are a group of birds that catch insects while flying. This group includes species such as includes nightjars, such as the eastern whippoorwill and the common nighthawk, flycatchers such as the Acadian flycatcher and olive-sided flycatcher, and lastly, swallows and swifts such as the barn swallow and chimney swift. Because of their insect-eating strategies, aerial insectivores spend most of their time in flight, and their bodies are built perfectly for this lifestyle. They have long wings, short beaks, big eyes for spotting those tiny insects, short legs, and they typically have shorter necks. And all of these features add up to make these birds amazing flyers. The aerial insectivores have a ferocious appetite for insects, with some eating upwards of 1,000 a day. They are migratory, so they spend their summers in North America and then fly south for the winter. And unfortunately, this group is at risk. Which brings us to the status of aerial insectivores in Canada. So using nearly 50 years of data, the 2019 State of Canada's Birds Report shows that Canada has lost 59% of its aerial insectivore populations. So we're losing aerial insectivore species at a faster rate than any other bird group in Canada. For example, over the last 10 years, 80% of the bird species newly listed as threatened or endangered in Canada were aerial insectivores. So now that we know generally about aerial insectivores, let's discuss the focus species, bank swallows. So bank swallows are the smallest swallow species in Canada. They have dark brown upper parts and white underparts with a large brown band across the chest, which is the key feature when identifying bank swallows from other swallow species. And the males and females look identical. So here's a side-by-side comparison of all the swallows and swifts that you might see together, including the barn swallow, tree swallow, chimney swift, and cliff swallow. The clearest distinguishing feature for the bank swallow, again, is that brown band across the chest. All other species have a plain chest. And also a reminder that bank swallows are the smallest species in Canada. So if you are having a difficult time telling the species apart, you can try comparing the sizes of the individuals within the flock. Their scientific name, riparia, means of the riverbank and refers to their nesting habitat, which is erodible banks, generally along rivers or lakes. They are one of the most widely distributed birds in the world, found on every continent except Antarctica and Australia. And in many parts of its range, the bank swallow is called sand martin. Bank swallows breed in Canada and in the southern half of the US during our summer months. In mid to late August, they begin the fall migration back to their winter grounds in South America. They stay in South America, mainly in the southern cone grasslands, until February, when spring migration back to Canada begins, and they begin searching for their nesting habitat in around mid-April, late April. So bank swallows forage from dusk till dawn, often around Water bodies or grasslands that support a diversity of aerial insects. They roost, which means a place where birds rest during the day or night in communal mixed species flocks, often in wetlands. Bank swallows look for a sandy or loose substrate bank that are near vertical along ocean, coasts, lakes, rivers, and other wetlands for nesting. When suitable habitat is found, the male will dig a burrow roughly 60 to 90 centimeters deep into the bank using his bill and feet over 4 to 5 days. Once he's finished with that, the female will come in and do the nest building. She will collect roots, rootlets, grasses, and feathers to build the nest. And bank swallows generally have 3 to 5 eggs per clutch and can have 1 to 2 clutches per season. Besides nesting in natural embankments, bank swallows will nest in human-created artificial habitat made from walls with perfectly sized tubes and in aggregate pits and quarries. Bank swallows begin breeding when they're about 2 years old, and they have a high site fidelity, meaning they tend to return to the same breeding site year after year. They are colony nesters and will nest in groups ranging from a few individuals to several thousand. So now that we know a little bit more about bank swallows and their requirements, I will discuss their specific status and the threat that they face. We saw already that as a whole, the group of aerial insectivores in Canada have declined 59% over the last 50 years. Bank swallows, unfortunately, are the species declining at the fastest rate within the group of aerial insectivores. The Federal Bank Swallow Recovery Strategy states that over the last 40 years, Canada has lost 98% of its bank swallow population, a 98% loss. Bank swallows were listed as threatened across Canada under the Species at Risk Act in 2017. This means that the current science and data trends on bank swallow populations shows that bank swallows are likely to continue to decline in numbers and become endangered unless some form of conservation occurs. So why are aerial insectivores declining at such an alarming rate? The reasons are still being researched today, but one major threat is the decline of aerial insects, their food source. Insects are declining across the globe due to an increase in pesticide use, climate change, and habitat loss. Pesticide use has increased as humans switch from small, diversified crop farms to large monoculture or one-crop farms. Monoculture farms require more pesticides than diverse farms because the reduced diversity in crops reduces the diversity of insects that a farm can support. A reduction in insect diversity throws off the natural systems in place that keep populations balanced, often leading to an outbreak in one species of pest that is further controlled by more pesticides. The shift in insect diversity and abundance affects aerial insectivores. For example, a study from 2012 looking at well-preserved chimney swift poop found that their prey source had shifted since 1944. The researchers noticed less Caloptra or beetle remains and more Hemptura or true bug remains in chimney swift poop. Beetles are the preferred food of aerial insectivores as they have a higher caloric value, meaning birds have to eat less of them to sustain their energy. True bugs, however, have a lower caloric value, meaning aerial insectivores have to forage for longer to get enough calories. This is concerning because it takes energy to catch prey, so the adults could have a net loss of energy when foraging on true bugs alone. The authors of the study argued that heavy use of DDT had decimated the beetle populations by the 1960s, leading to this drastic prey shift in chimney swifts. DDT is a non-selective insecticide, meaning it could kill any species of insect that it comes in contact with, and it was heavily used in North America until it was banned in 1972. You might know DDT as the main cause of decline for bald eagles and peregrine falcons, which is what led to the ban. Climate change is also impacting insect-bird relations by causing a phenological mismatch between birds and insects. A phenological mismatch is when interacting species change the timing of regularly repeated phases in their life cycles at different rates. For example, birds and insects use changes in the amount of daylight, food abundance, and temperature as cues for their life cycles. When days are shorter, temperatures are cooler, and food availability declines in South America, birds begin to migrate to their breeding grounds in Canada. At the same time, insects in Canada have warmer, longer days, triggering the next phase of their life cycle. Aerial insectivores have evolved with insects to arrive and breed during peak adult insect abundance. However, with climate change, seasonal cues may come earlier or later for insects or birds. So the timing between peak insect abundance and peak breeding bird season could no longer line up. This can have devastating impacts on nestling survival rates and the number of attempted nests per breeding season if food is a limiting factor. And finally, the conversion of breeding habitats such as forests, grasslands, and wetlands to human landscapes is limiting the amount of available breeding habitat for insects. Climate change is also directly impacting aerial insectivore populations by creating more unpredictable and intense storms that can damage important habitats and blow migratory birds off course. Like Hurricane Wilma in 2005, which moved thousands of birds off course to Western Europe, including several hundred chimney swifts. The next year, chimney swift populations had declined by half of what it was the year before the storm. Further threats include the loss of breeding habitat across Canada and the loss of overwintering habitat in South America as human development continues to encroach on natural spaces. And bank swallows face even more direct impacts from climate change because with increased storm surges comes increased erosion along coastal shorelines and riverbanks where these birds nest. Increased erosion can make banks and shorelines too unstable for nesting and can make already established colonies collapse. To show a recent example of how much storm surges can impact bank swallow nesting habitat, here are photos from PEI National Park before and after Hurricane Fiona this year. PEI National Park said it's the worst damage to their dune systems in close to a century. And in this case, the storm actually created bank swallow habitat, but that's not always the case. Increased erosion can make banks and shorelines too unstable for nesting, and if these storms happen during the breeding season, the increased erosion can make the colonies collapse. The negative impact of increased erosion is heightened by coastal landowners choosing to rock armor their property. The picture on the left shows rock armoring or riprap, which involves using cement or large rocks to create a wall between the eroding land and the water, blocking bank swallows entirely from nesting in these areas. So what's being done to help conserve bank swallows? Birds Canada is heavily involved in bank swallow research. In Ontario, for example, this summer, Birds Canada staff were capturing bank swallows to band them, which helps estimate the survival of adult and juvenile birds. They also put MODIS tags on some individuals. And MODIS tags, if you're not familiar, are basically radio tags that send out a pulsing signal. And when the bird flies past a MODIS tower, the tower pings it and we get a point on a map. With enough points, we can follow their migration path. And finally, they collected feather samples that can be used for an isotopic analysis, which can tell us a ton of information from where the bird hatched to what makes up the majority of the bird's diet. Most of bank swallow habitat is on private property, which means private landowners have the biggest ability to make change for their population. Currently in Atlantic Canada, rock armoring, or as I already said, using cement walls or blocks to prevent shoreline erosion is very common. We are planning to work with partners to create an example of a living shoreline site. Living shorelines is a technique for shoreline stabilization using a combination of natural materials such as coastal plants, wood debris, and rock placed strategically to slow wave action and protect the shore. The photo on the left shows an eroding shoreline before stabilization, and the photo on the right shows a mix of rocks and vegetation used to protect the shoreline and prevent erosion. The example site we will create will use similar techniques, but at a site where a bank swallow colony is already established. We hope that we can use the site to show how successful living shorelines can be at preventing erosion, and how this more natural method to stabilizing shorelines can help protect bank swallow nesting habitat. New this year in Atlantic Canada, we launched the Atlantic Canada Bank Swallow Monitoring Project. This project is designed to cover all of Atlantic Canada and locate and monitor all known bank swallow colonies every year. We are working with partners and other organizations across the region to help us achieve this monitoring goal. This map shows some of the current colonies we know about, and the red markers indicate that those colonies were monitored this year. And the yellow ones are ones we just know about, but potentially weren't monitored this year. So this project will need some volunteers as well, and I will talk about that more in the next section. So how can you help these awesome birds? You can help bank swallows directly by noticing them and keeping your distance in the summer. Bank swallows will often nest near popular beaches or waterways in the summer. If you notice holes along the banks or see bank swallows flying around, please keep your distance from the birds and the colonies, and please tell others to do the same. It is illegal to harm or disturb the nesting habitat of migratory birds. So if you see this happening, please report it. Further, if you are a coastal or waterfront property owner with erosion problems, please consider using natural techniques to help control the erosion rather than rock armoring. You can visit Helping Nature Heal. I thought I put the website up here, but maybe I didn't. Helping Nature Heal, if you Google it, it should come up. And they have a ton of information about living shorelines there, as well as I think they're offering a course on how to do it to teach people how to do it themselves. So pretty cool site. You can also consider volunteering with us. The Atlantic Canada Bank Swallow Monitoring Program only requires 1 visit, but up to 6 visits to a colony each year between May and July. The only equipment needed is binoculars, a pencil, and a phone or some way to get location information. If you're interested in learning more about this project, you can email me or visit our website on Nature Counts. If you can't volunteer, but you happen to see a bank swallow colony, please report the location to me. We're trying to find every colony across Atlantic Canada, so any sightings are super valuable for us to learn about where they're going. And so my email is listed here, and it can also be found on the Birds Canada website and the Nature Counts website. To help all birds and the insects that many birds depend on, you can plant a garden. A bird garden has a few main features, including planting native species with structural diversity. Using native plants uses less water and pesticides than non-native plants. Structural diversity includes leaving leaf litter, adding flowering plants, shrubs, and deciduous and conifer trees to gardens. The more diverse a garden, the more diverse its inhabitants. Water features are a great addition so that birds can drink and bathe, especially during the hot summer months. And finally, birdhouses can provide nesting habitat for cavity nesters such as the tree swallow. To help get you started, Birds Canada has created a website, birdgardens.ca, where you can plan your garden, identify what plants are native to your area, and see a list of potential bird visitors and more. Another easy way to help birds is to put stickers on your windows to prevent birds from colliding with them. A 2013 report found that an average of 22.4 million birds die annually in Canada from collisions with windows. During the day, birds will fly into windows if they can see the reflection of trees or vegetation, or if they can see a plant inside the window. Nocturnal birds will fly into windows with a light shining through at night. This is because nocturnal birds use light from the moon to navigate, getting mixed up when they see light from a window. The stickers on the window will break up the reflection and make the glass look like a barrier. In order for stickers to be effective, they need to be placed in a dense 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter pattern. They need to be applied to the outside of the window. There needs to be a high contrast between the glass and the stickers. And finally, the stickers have to cover the entire window. You can visit flap.org for more information about that. And again, in 2013, the same report estimated that cats kill an average of 196 million breeding birds annually in Canada. 116 million are killed by feral cats and 80 million are killed by domestic pet cats. Cats kill more breeding birds in Canada annually than any other source of death. In fact, cat predation, collision with house and building windows, and collisions with vehicles and transmission lines altogether cause 95% of breeding bird deaths in Canada. You can help with this by keeping cats indoors. If your cat is used to going outside, you can try putting your cat on a leash or building a cat patio or catio, like the picture on the left, for your cats to go outside safely. There's actually 3 cats in that picture. It's kind of hard to see. If you have barn cats or know of a feral colony, you can work with your local humane society to see if they run a trap, neuter, return program. Trap, neuter, return programs humanely reduce the cat population over time, and they can also receive other medical care if needed. If your cat has to remain outdoors, a study published in 2021 found that providing your cats with a high protein food and only 5 to 10 minutes of play a day will lower the amount of animals they kill. But it is best to just keep cats indoors. Climate change is impacting us and every species around the globe, and it's having multiple effects on Canada's aerial insectivore population. You can use your voice to vote for stronger climate action and policies that help protect bank swallows. And finally, you can get out and bird. If you have, it seems like an experienced birding group here, but if you are new to birding, there's a lot. I've listed here some apps and websites and books that can help you with identifying species. Also, if you are out birding, there are several places that you can report sightings and contribute to citizen science projects, including eBird, iNaturalist, and Nature Counts. And that's it. So thank you everyone who made it out to hear this presentation today. Thank you to Nova Scotia Bird Society for having me. And thank you to our partners, funders, and donors that help Birds Canada achieve our conservation goals. So if there's any questions, feel free to ask.
So Heather, I'm just going to stop the viewing of the screen if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
You can put it back on if people want to see a particular slide again.
I
Sure.
would like to see the slide with the email address and website.
There we go.
Okay, going back. Is that the
Thank
right
you.
one?
Yeah, that's the
You're
one. Thank you.
So folks, any questions? I noticed there's been some. So I thought of a question while we're going through this, and it might feels a bit like a little bit of a dumb question, but I'm good for dumb questions. So has there been any attempt to develop artificial nesting sites for bank swallows? I mean, I know that they bank in the sides of cliffs, and is the pictures that you shown, excellent pictures. One from David Corkadale, in fact. Thank you, David. But I wondered if there's any way to create artificial nesting sites.
Yes, so we have tried. There's an example site. I'm not exactly sure where it is in New Brunswick, but there is an example site where they brought in material from a different location and piled it up quite high and hoped that bank swallows would nest there. My understanding is that it hasn't been overly successful because it requires a lot of maintenance. There's not that natural erosion process that helps keep the vegetation off. And so I think they had a lot of issues with the second year. There was some nesting there, but there was quite a lot of predation as well. So due to the vegetation, it allows things to get grips and get into the burrows a little bit easier. But also I think they were just too short and not high enough to deter mainly mammals, I would think, from getting into their nest. So as far as I know, it's kind of we're having less success here, but I've read that in the UK, they have a lot of success with the actual artificial walls, which they actually build them out of cement and then put tubes in that fit the size and the deepness and have a little burrow at the end. And they have a lot of success there, but I'm not sure if we've tried it here, but I've heard that they're not as successful elsewhere. So there are possibilities. They just are more costly and seem to be less effective than we hoped for.
I've had members who have arranged to have osprey platforms built on their properties so that they can help out ospreys, right? And so I think individuals are willing to go to some expense. That's why I ask. I think that there are members who would be very interested in helping out. There was another request to repost the slide with the map of the known bank swallows. So sorry, Heather, we could put that back up again.
No, that's okay. I should say too, right now we have a chimney swift fund for repairing if you have a chimney that's been used as a roost or a nest site, we can help with finances for that to help people keep their chimneys in good shape. I'm hoping that we can eventually get something like that for a bank swallow as well, to encourage people to put in those the living shorelines as opposed to the rock armoring. So that could be hopefully a potential thing that comes up in the future.
And there's multiple threats, of course, because the lack of insects, that is an astounding statistics, 98% decline.
Yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking. Especially since they seem so common still. It doesn't, I don't know. I think that makes it harder to realize because you can just walk out and see them a lot of the time. But yeah, 98% loss.
Yeah. Susan had a question. You mentioned that barn swallows tend to go back to the same breeding spot. Are they likely to use the new potential nesting sites in PEI where the dunes were washed away in Fiona?
Yeah, for sure. So they do tend to go back to the same sites, but if it's say like a first year returning or something, or a second year, then it's their first time breeding. I guess second year because they're two when they start to breed. They'll look for new habitat. So they'll go close to where they were born potentially, but within, I think generally it's within a few kilometers of where they were born is where they'll end up. So if they're already, we do have some, as you can see there, we do have some colonies along Prince Edward Island. So there's potential that they will use those newly created banks. And they don't return to sites if it failed. So if their nest failed, they'll often pick a new site the next year. So that it makes it really challenging to know where their critical habitat is and where we need to protect, because it's so dynamic and it changes every year. It changes seasonally from the storms, right? So yeah, it's a bit of a trick.
Yeah. It's very complex. Barry McLaughlin said that she thinks there's a place maybe in Holland where the building codes require nesting structures on new construction. Do you know anything about that, Heather?
No, but that's incredibly interesting. I hope that continues.
Wouldn't that be a good trend for Canada, Nova Scotia? Natalie asks, if bank swallows have a colony at an active quarry, what are the obligations of the quarry to protect the nests?
Good question. So yeah, we've just actually started our outreach to quarries about this. Because they are protected under the Species at Risk Act and under the Migratory Bird Convention Act, their nest and the adult birds themselves are protected. So technically, if an operator notices a colony, they are supposed to stop work around there and do a 50-meter buffer zone around it. That's our minimum recommendation right now. But if they have bigger equipment, they need to go bigger than that. And then once the bank swallows have left, they are allowed to go in and knock over that site. So we are working with doing some outreach right now to try to let people know that really all they have to do at quarries and pits is make sure that the slope of their piles is less than 70 degrees, because bank swallows will only nest on those really vertical embankments. So we do have some best management practices for them that we're hoping people will just choose to follow and and like birds, but it's just because it's not really regulated at the moment, but they are supposed to stop and not excavate that site until it's done.
Right, but if they like to go back to the same locations once that nesting is done, then when the birds come back to that location, of course, that nesting site is gone. Right.
So we do recommend that if they do have to take down that nesting site, they pick a spot that's inactive, that will be inactive for the rest or for the next breeding season, and make that attractable. So make that the 70-degree or more vertical habitat, and then hopefully they'll stay away from any active work areas. And then that way they wouldn't have to stop working at all. The bank swallows can just be left alone if they're far enough away from where all the machinery is.
Okay. David McCorkdale asks about the map of sites, specifically that I'm wondering if this is the Birds Canada, if these are the sites where Birds Canada focus their work, because on eBird, MBBA, and INAT, there's a lot wider distribution.
So these are the colonies that we have located from partners and volunteers over this project just started in 2021. So yeah, we have looked through all of that, but maybe we're missing something. But this is also confirmed breeding as well. So some of those research projects have potential breeding as a code or as an option. So this is confirmed breeding locations. But yes, by all means, we do not have all the sites yet, which is why we need so much help.
Okay. And the confirmed what are the criteria for confirming a breeding site?
I'm not sure. That's the I'm talking about that. I always forget the name when I'm in like the atlas or the breeding bird survey. The breeding bird survey, it doesn't represent bank swallows super great, for example, because they follow certain paths where bank swallows aren't, but also yeah, and they also have that code. So I'm not positive, sorry about that, but it just, a lot of the data that we do have doesn't necessarily confirm a breeding colony is the problem. So we got to figure out where they are, and they move so frequently as well. So
I think it's a good plug for the citizen scientists, to all birders who are out there. I often see birds, but I don't necessarily put a breeding code in. So maybe a higher in this instance, and maybe for more species than just bank swallows, it would be really good idea to make use of those breeding codes in eBird.
yeah, definitely. Especially we're not looking at roost sites or anything right now. So if you happen to see a bank swallow at a roost site, that's not a breeding habitat. But it would be good to know that it was reported there, but not at a breeding habitat.
Okay. Parker Dunham wants to know if there is, if there's a known nest colony, whom should be notified?
Definitely starting with me is a great place.
Okay.
Because I have, like I said, we have a lot of partners that we're working with, so we can help. We can set up a monitoring plan for that colony, or if you do find a colony yourself and you're interested in monitoring it, that's awesome too. And you can email me, and we can get all set up on each accounts, and you can go out and monitor it every year. So yeah, definitely start with me. But if you notice one that is someone's damaging, like we've had a few members of the public reach out about colonies that they found where someone was rock harboring, for example. So you can reach out to us as well about that, and I'll get into contact with enforcement officers. Or I did post that number as well for somewhere here where you can report. Yeah. So Environment and Climate Change Canada Wildlife Enforcement, that's a number you can always call if you see someone damaging a colony or threatening the birds in any way.
Okay. And then people could report to you so that you have more information about where they are breeding. Cormier, I don't know which Cormier, I think it's probably Joan. Many bank swallows used to nest in what is now the cliffs of Fundy Geopark, UNESCO Geopark area along the coast in Cumberland and Colchester County. She's not seeing any sites west of Parisborough. And is there more that could be added? I guess we've
yeah. Yeah, definitely. As I said, it's a pretty new project, so we are just kind of getting off the ground with this, and all of our sites so far are ones that partners or volunteers have found. I don't know where that map went. So we by no means do we have all the colonies yet. So absolutely, if you see one, that's really why we're doing a lot of this outreach, is to try to hopefully be able to find all of them, and then have lots of good trend data of how they change and move over time.
Right, great. Parker Dunham has another question. Is it common for bank swallows and belted kingfishers to share a site?
Oh, yes, great question. Absolutely. Yeah. So belted kingfishers will have a bigger nest burrow, and it's often off to the side. So bank swallows are usually quite closely clustered together, and you should always see more than one hole if it's a bank swallow. But yes, and sometimes sometimes their bank swallow burrows can look bigger because of erosion over time. But those ones will look floppy, like nature did it, versus a bird going in and building a perfectly kind of round burrow. It will look like falling apart. So that's one way to tell, but they'll definitely be there. So will northern rough-winged swallows. They tend to nest right beside bank swallows as well. And same thing, it would just be one burrow kind of at the edge of the colony if they're there. Also a species at risk and can be reported too.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions, folks? David, you have your hand raised. Would you like to?
Yeah, I guess we're talking about bank swallows here. If you go back and look at the Maritime Breeding Bird Atlas, they're consistently nest along cliff tops around Cape Breton, Fundy Shore, all sorts of places in Nova Scotia. But it doesn't appear as if many of those appear on the map. In fact, somewhat ironically, the highest point count of an individual species of bird on Cape Breton through the bird atlas was bank swallow. And that was at a colony at Cranberry Point and Sydney Mines. They're still there. They haven't changed. Those cliffs, I mean, unlike places in Ontario where they nest, which tend to be a lot more susceptible to change year to year, a lot of the cliffs, I mean, they change a little bit, but they're not nearly as susceptible to getting destroyed completely as many other places. So I'm just wondering that, yeah, there's a lot of bank swallows out there. If you look at eBird, if you look at the Maritime Breeding Bird Atlas, and I'm just wondering how those are dealt with. I noticed the colony at Red Islands, which I think it's a species at risk project around the Verdure that I'm involved with Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources. That's being monitored through that project. That's great. But there's quite literally hundreds of bank swallows nesting around the cliffs on Cape Breton. And I don't really see too many of them there. And I know I've talked to, people like Julie McKnight, I've talked to her, and I know they were up last year or the year before. I'd love to see a lot more of those involved. There's lots of people here that would be keen. So.
Well, that's exactly what we need. Yeah, unfortunately, we had some summer staff this year that were searching around Nova Scotia trying to find them, but they never made their way up there, and we just didn't have. I'm not sure. Honestly, I joined Birds Canada last year, and the project had been started by someone else. And as far as I knew, we had looked through all of that already, but maybe I'll have to go double check. But if you do happen to know the locations, it would be great if you could send them to me.
Well, I would suggest they're all in the Bird Atlas. I mean, that's
okay.
and they're all in, lots of it's in eBird. Yeah, and I mean, I'm a transplanted Ontarian, but I do react when Cape Breton gets left out.
Yeah.
I don't think you're that transplanted anymore, David.
Yeah.
No, I understand. I can't wait I'm going to hopefully move out there soon. And Cape Breton was on my list of things to get to pretty early on next spring. So I agree. Thank you for pointing that out.
And it's good to know that Nova Scotia Bird Society members can really contribute to this way through citizen science and by connecting to you directly and giving you that information.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's exactly why I'm doing this. So thank you.
Yes, well, thank you.
Heather, this is slightly off topic, but there are a couple of sites near me where cliff swallows have nested in the past, and people have been very upset to find them on their building and have destroyed the nests. Is that similarly against the law, and should we involve? You had some enforcement person's contact information up earlier. Is that the appropriate way to go with that?
Yes, I think so. But sometimes I know that sometimes people don't respond well necessarily to coming down from like sort of the government says this. So generally where we would start is just maybe having a conversation if you know the landowners and just letting them know that's a species at risk. They are protected, and they definitely should not be destroying the nest. It is illegal. They are protected under the Migratory Bird Act as well. So yeah, I think a conversation is a good place to start. But and if you if you want to send me an email too, I'd be happy. I could send out get someone to send out some information pamphlets to you or something too that you could share with them if you're interested. But yeah, you could always report as well to that, the enforcement officers.
Great.
That's definitely a good step. Sorry. Yeah.
I'll try the conversation route first, and I will email you for those brochures.
Great. Thanks.
Let us know how you make out, Parker. It's a difficult.
Well, one of them is our local fire department, unfortunately, the side of the fire hall. What I have to find out is whether they're still trying to nest there or whether it's no longer an issue. So,
Right.
Yeah, they do seem. I have another fire department in mind, and you know, I found that they were really approachable, but they're also trying to manage people coming in and out of the doors, and there's sometimes people give them flack because birds do their thing on their on the guests' heads, but you know, that's a small price to pay. In fact, it's good luck, isn't it? To be shot.
And such a neat nest to look at. I love looking at their nest.
There.
Oh, yeah.
I guess that's why we're all birders, though.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Heather. This has really been great information for us, and really good to strengthen those connections so that we get more information and do what we can to protect what is left of the population of bank swallows.
Definitely. Yes. Thank you. And thank you all for listening and for liking birds. It seems like a really awesome group. So you guys do a lot of great things.
It is a great group for sure. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Ken's got a raised hand here. I'm sorry. Didn't notice that, Ken.
I noticed that you mentioned nature counts, and that's a big beef of mine, is that most birders tend to use iNaturalist or eBird to record their data, and Birds Canada is now asking everybody to submit their data on nature counts, which I find quite cumbersome, and I don't know, a lot of duplication. The last 2 years I've been to Newfoundland volunteering on the Breeding Bird Atlas, and I do everything by eBird, but then when I come home, I have to transfer everything to iNaturalist, to bird counts, which I find it quite annoying. Why can't Birds Canada use data from eBird?
So we do. I think for nature counts, the concept of nature counts is it's more, I guess eBird is a database too. You know what? I don't have a good answer for that. I'm not sure. The reason that we're using nature counts in this case is because we have so many partners working with us that are submitting data, and it's easier for them to get all of the data for an individual project off of nature counts so that they can keep their data theirs and use all the data that they're participating in collecting in. I've heard that from many people. Nature counts is not as intuitive as eBird, that's for sure. Yeah, I don't have a good answer, and I'm sorry that it's frustrating. I think that there's work going on where it can automatically link eBird and nature counts so that we can get your list right over. But I'm not sure. That's not my expertise. But yeah.
Well, yes, it's true that you can link them, but there's still, you still have to doctor up your lists. You have to add breeding codes, and there's a number of things that you have to do. It's just not seamless.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'll take that note back and I'll mention it to people who can make the change there. But yes, you're not the only one who has felt that way, and I'm sorry that it's a hassle for you.
Well, I think that within a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, the Maritimes may be entering another breeding bird atlas, and if nature counts is the preferred method, which seems to be now the preferred method of recording data, I think what I found in the first atlas, if people found it difficult, they just didn't do it. And so, I had a lot of people. I was a regional coordinator for one area, and we had a lot of people signed up, but once they had to do so much paperwork, they just didn't do it.
Yeah. that makes sense to me. Have you tried there is a Nature Counts app that was released recently. I think it's still being fixed as well because it is a newer program, but it might make it easier because you could do it directly into the app instead of having to sheet and then transfer from doing all the transfer. But yeah, it still doesn't solve the problem fully.
I did have the app on my phone this summer, but
Okay.
I couldn't figure out how to use it. I guess I need a training session.
Honestly, I haven't figured out how to use it yet, so I'm with you on that. But yeah, hopefully everything, it's still relatively new. I'm hoping it will get easier over time. Yeah, just hang in there and I will I will message people who can hopefully make that change or let me know where it's at and I can let you know next time or something if you're interested.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, a couple of final warnings, people. It is, I think it's hunting season, so be careful in the woods. Make sure you wear orange and watch out and be safe. And the other is it's also tick season, and I've had my first attached tick just on Monday. So they're out there and they're looking for you. Not the hunters, but the ticks. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Heather.
Thanks very much, Heather. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Susan. Bye.
Thanks, Diane.
Thank you.